In the depths of space, where starlight dies between the endless void and hope becomes a currency more precious than antimatter, the Veltar had learned what it meant to despair. Their homeworld of Nexerthil hung like a wounded jewel against the cosmic dark, its azure atmosphere now streaked with the orange scars of orbital bombardment, massive defense platforms. Once the pride of their civilization, drifted as burning hulks through the debris field that had been their outer system. For 73 cycles, the siege had ground on like some inexorable machine designed to devour not just worlds but souls. High Admiral Zarxim pressed his scaled palm against the viewing portal of the command center, watching another transport vessel vanish in a bloom of superheated plasma. His people, refugees fleeing the dying cities below, extinguished like candles in a hurricane. The ridge along his elongated skull, normally a proud crest of deep purple, had faded to the color of old blood. "How many?" he asked, without turning from the window. 17,000 aboard that transport," came the reply from Navigation Officer Kixanda, her voice barely a whisper through the translator, including 300 younglings from the coastal academies. 17,000. The number joined the others carved into Zuthamor's memory like acid etching. 2,437,916. That was the count of Veltar who had died since the Dominion arrived. The Dominion. Even thinking their name brought a taste like corroded metal to Zethmore's primary tongue. They came from the Galactic Core, a confederation of species united under a single terrible philosophy: absorption or extinction. Worlds that submitted became fuel for their war machine. Worlds that resisted became examples. Admiral Communications Officer Rithal's tendrils flickered with anxiety across his console. "We're receiving another transmission from the Dominion fleet." On screen, the main display shimmered to life, revealing a face that belonged in nightmares. General Korfik of the Dominion bore the mutations of a dozen conquered species. Chitness armor, grafted over synthetic flesh, neural implants glowing like infected stars along his skull, and eyes that held the cold mathematics of genocide. "People of Nexertul," Korvak's voice carried through their dying world like a funeral bell. "Your defenses lie in ruins. Your fleet is scattered. Your cities burn. Yet still you resist." A sound that might have been laughter, if laughter could carry the weight of worlds. "I admire your tenacity. It will make your absorption that much more flavorful." Zethmore found his voice, though it cracked like breaking stone. "We will never submit to your blasphemy, Korfak. The Veltar would rather die." "Yes, I know." The general's expression shifted to something resembling pity, if pity could be weaponized. "But death is not your only option, nor is it theirs." The display shifted, showing thousands of Veltar prisoners bound in energy shackles, their eyes hollow with defeat. "Surrender, and they live. Continue this futile resistance, and watch them suffer for your pride." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in silence broken only by the distant rumble of impact tremors. Another orbital strike, another district reduced to molten glass. Admiral Kixanda's voice held the weight of someone speaking truth that no one wanted to hear. "Our projections show complete orbital collapse within 6 cycles. The shield generators are failing faster than we can repair them." "What about the distress signals?" Zethmore turned to face his staff, each one bearing the exhaustion of a species watching its own extinction. "The Galactic Alliance. The Confederacy of Worlds?" Rithal's tendrils drooped. "No responses, sir. The Alliance is... They're dealing with 3 Dominion incursions simultaneously. The Confederacy has closed their borders. As for the others," he gestured helplessly, "they fear the Dominion more than they fear dishonor." "And the humans?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. "Humanity, the newest species to achieve interstellar travel, barely 3 centuries since they'd crawled out of their gravity well. Most of the galaxy treated them as a curiosity at best, a potential threat at worst. They came from what the diplomatic corps called a Class 12 death world. A planet so hostile that sentient life shouldn't have evolved there at all, let alone achieved intelligence." Admiral Rithal's voice carried an odd note. "The humans, their response was unusual." "Explain." They didn't decline to help. They didn't accept either. Their message was, the officer consulted his display, his natural translator struggling with human linguistic patterns. "We'll be in touch." That was it. 3 words. Sent 47 cycles ago. Zathmore felt something twist in his chest. Not hope, not yet. But the faintest possibility of it. He had met humans before during the diplomatic missions that followed first contact. Strange creatures, these humans, soft-skinned and fragile-looking, yet they carried themselves with a confidence that bordered on madness. They came from a world where everything, the weather, the geology, the very microorganisms, had tried to kill them for millions of years, and somehow, impossibly, they had not just survived but thrived. "Sir," another voice cut through his reverie. Weapons Officer Telshara, her bioluminescent patches flickering with urgent patterns. Long-range sensors are detecting massive hyperspace disturbances at the edge of the system. Dominion reinforcements. Unknown. The signatures they're unlike anything in our databases. Zethmore moved to the tactical display, watching as the computer tried to make sense of what it was seeing. 3 massive contacts, their energy signatures pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost organic. Distance. Approximately 14 light minutes in closing. At current velocity, they'll reach our position in roughly 8 hours. 8 hours. Zethmore looked around his command center, at the faces of his people, each one carved with the exhaustion of those who had fought too long against impossible odds. In 8 hours, those contacts would either bring salvation or bear witness to the final moments of the Veltar civilization. All stations. Maintain surveillance on the incoming contacts. Continue evacuation procedures for the northern continent. And, he paused, feeling the weight of command settle deeper on his shoulders. Send a message to all department heads. I want every able-bodied Veltar ready to fight. If this is our end, we'll meet it standing. But even as he gave the orders, Zathmar found himself remembering something from those diplomatic meetings years ago. The human ambassador, a female named Jackson, if he recalled correctly, had shared something their species called whiskey. The liquid had burned his throat, but her words had burned deeper. "You know what the difference is between humans and most other species?" she had asked, her eyes reflecting light like polished metal. "When something tries to kill us, we get angry. When something tries to kill our friends," she had smiled then, and Zethmore had felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alcohol. "Well, let's just say you wouldn't want to find out." Now, watching those unknown contacts approach through the dark between stars, Zethmore wondered if the galaxy was about to learn exactly what Ambassador Jackson had meant. Meanwhile, in the deep black between worlds, something ancient and terrible was stirring. The UES Retribution hung in space like a predator carved from midnight and fury, its stealth fields warping light around its hull until it seemed less like a ship and more like a hole punched through reality itself. 1,200 meters of human engineering at its most ruthless, weapons systems that had been refined through centuries of warfare, engines that could crack planets, and a crew that had volunteered for a mission that High Command called inadvisable and the press would have called suicide. Captain Daniel Cross stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display update with information gathered by sensor drones that had been observing the Nexer Thule system for the past 6 weeks. Tall and lean, with gray threading through hair that had once been black, Cross bore the scars of someone who had spent most of his adult life in uniform, but it was his eyes that marked him as dangerous. Pale blue and utterly calm, the eyes of a man who had made peace with violence long ago. "Status report," he said without looking away from the display. "All systems nominal, sir." Commander Lisa Rodriguez moved to stand beside him, her own attention focused on the stream of data flowing across secondary screens. Weapons charged, stealth systems at maximum efficiency. "The Dominion fleet hasn't detected our presence." Cross nodded slowly. The Retribution was one of only 3 Nightfall-class dreadnoughts in the human fleet, ships designed for a very specific kind of warfare. While other species built vessels for exploration or trade or even conventional military operations, humans had built these ships for one purpose: to hunt things that considered themselves apex predators. "What's the civilian count planet-side?" "Approximately 4.7 billion Veltar," came the response from Lieutenant Commander Park at the intelligence station. "Evacuation efforts are ongoing, but the Dominion has been systematically targeting transport ships. Current projections suggest total population collapse within 6 standard days. 6 days. Cross had seen the intelligence reports on Dominion occupation, how they processed civilian populations into biological resources, how they converted captured soldiers into combat servitors, how they turned children into weapons. The thought sent something cold and lethal flowing through his veins. "Sir," Rodriguez's voice carried a note of concern. "I have to ask again, are you sure about this? We're talking about engaging an entire Dominion battle group with a single ship. The odds are—" "Noted, Commander." Cross finally turned to face his bridge crew, 27 men and women who had volunteered to follow him into what most tactical analysts considered certain death. "Anyone who wants to reconsider can transfer to the shuttle bay. No questions asked, no records kept. This mission goes against everything we've been taught about proper engagement protocols." No one moved. Cross hadn't expected them to. He'd handpicked this crew from volunteers who had lost friends or family to Dominion raids along the frontier. They weren't here for glory or duty. They were here for something older and more primal. "Sir," the voice belonged to Ensign Martinez at Communications. "We're receiving updated intelligence from the observer drones. The Dominion fleet has begun bombardment of the remaining population centers." Cross moved to Martinez's station, reading the data streams that painted a picture of systematic genocide. Kinetic bombardment platforms, reducing cities to craters. Biological weapons deployed against agricultural centers. Transport ships full of refugees picked off like targets in a training exercise. Estimated time to total civilian elimination. At current rates, 36 hours, sir. 36 hours. Cross felt something settle in his chest, not anger, not rage, but something colder and infinitely more dangerous. He had spent 23 years in the Union Navy, fighting pirates and corporate mercenaries, and the occasional territorial dispute. But this was different. This was murder on a scale that violated every principle humanity claimed to uphold. "Mr. Park," Cross's voice carried absolute authority. "Signal the other ships. Operation Hellhound is now active." Park's fingers moved over his console, sending encrypted messages to the UES Nemesis and UES Wrathful, the 2 other Nightfall-class ships holding position at the system's edge. Cross had argued for months to get authorization for this mission, calling in every favor and making promises he might not live to keep. The official position was that humanity couldn't risk war with the Dominion over one system of questionable strategic value. The unofficial position, the one that had gotten him 3 of humanity's most powerful warships and their crews, was simpler. If someone wanted to commit genocide in human space, they were going to have to go through humans to do it. "Status on the stealth approach?" Cross asked. 18 hours to optimal attack position, Rodriguez replied. "The Dominion sensors still haven't detected us, but once we go active, they'll know exactly where we are," Cross finished. "Which is when things get interesting. Mr. Martinez, compose a message to Nexatul Command. Standard diplomatic encryption." "What should it say, sir?" Cross looked back at the tactical display where red icons marked Dominion ships and amber ones tracked the dying embers of Veltar resistance. In 18 hours, those icons would tell a very different story, or they would tell the story of 3 human ships dying very bravely in a cause that wouldn't be remembered by anyone. But that wasn't really the point, was it? Cross had learned something during his years of service, something that wasn't taught in any academy or written in any manual. Sometimes you didn't fight because you could win. Sometimes you fought because someone had to. "Tell them," Cross said quietly, "that the cavalry is coming." As the Retribution slipped deeper into the Nexter-Thol system, its stealth fields bending light and gravity around its hull, Captain Cross found himself thinking about home, about Earth, that blue-green ball of death and beauty that had forged humanity in the fires of evolution, about the promise he had made to himself when he first saw the Dominion intelligence reports, that no one would commit genocide while humans drew breath and had ships to fly. The galaxy was about to learn that humans kept their promises. All of them. General Corfax stood in the command cathedral of the battleship Dominion's Fist, watching the systematic dismantling of Veltar civilization with the clinical interest of a surgeon performing amputation. The cathedral, a vast chamber that rose 7 decks through the ship's superstructure, had been designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Curved walls of living bone pulsed with bioluminescent displays, while the floor beneath his feet was formed from compressed remains of worlds that had dared to resist the Dominion's advance. "Report," he commanded, his voice carrying through the neural link that connected him to every officer in his fleet. Fleet Coordinator Vistal, a creature that had once been 3 separate species before Dominion biotechnology had fused them into something more useful, gestured toward the primary hologram. "The northern continent is now 73% depopulated. Resistance in the southern archipelago has collapsed entirely. Projected completion of civilian elimination, 29 hours, 17 minutes. Korvac nodded, his attention already shifting to the next phase of operations. The Veltar had fought better than expected. Their fleet had lasted nearly 2 months instead of the projected 3 weeks. But the outcome had never been in doubt. No species could stand alone against the Dominion, not when they possessed the combined military might of 47 absorbed civilizations. "What of the resource extraction?" "Proceeding on schedule," reported another voice through the link. "This one belonging to Harvester Prime Nixkar. Biological processing centers are operating at 96% efficiency. The Veltar neural structure is proving highly compatible with our combat servitor matrix." "Excellent." Korvac allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Veltar would die, yes, but their bodies, their minds, their very essence would live on as part of something greater. The Dominion did not simply conquer, it assimilated, transforming resistance into loyalty, individuality into unity, weakness into strength. It was, he reflected, the closest thing to immortality the universe offered. General Vistal's voice carried a note of confusion. "We're detecting anomalous hyperspace signatures at the system's edge." Korvac turned to face the tactical display, watching as his sensors tried to analyze contacts that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Specification unknown. The signatures are irregular. They appear, vanish, then reappear in different locations. Our computers cannot establish consistent readings. How many contacts? Uncertain. Possibly 3, possibly more. The interference patterns are unlike anything in our databases. For the first time in cycles, Korvac felt something that might have been unease. The Dominion possessed sensor technology acquired from dozens of civilizations, refined through centuries of conquest. Very few things in the galaxy could evade their detection. Dispatch reconnaissance drones to investigate. Triple sensor sweeps on all approach vectors. Already done, General. The drones are... Vistal paused, tentacles writhing with agitation. "The drones have ceased transmission." Define ceased. "Sir, they've vanished from our sensors entirely. No debris, no energy signatures, no final transmissions. One moment they were approaching the anomalous contacts. The next, Korvac felt something cold settle in his chest. In his 3 centuries of service to the Dominion, he had conquered 41 worlds and absorbed 23 civilizations. He knew the taste of every kind of fear the galaxy had to offer. This was something new. All ships to defensive formation. Activate planetary bombardment protocols, maximum intensity. "Sir." Vestal's confusion rippled through the neural link. "That will eliminate the civilian population within 12 hours, but it will also destroy most of the biological resources we're here to execute the order." Korvac's voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had seen his enemy's final gambit unfold before. "Whatever is coming, I want this system secured before it arrives." As his fleet moved into defensive positions and began the final extermination of Nexterthol, Korvac found himself remembering stories from the core worlds, whispered tales of ships that appeared where no ships should be, of enemies who fought with techniques that violated every principle of civilized warfare, of a species that seemed to regard impossible odds not as obstacles but as personal challenges. But those were just stories. Myths created by defeated civilizations to explain their failures. Weren't they? Admiral Zafar watched his world die from the observation deck of Command Station Omega, the last functioning military facility in orbit above Nexerthul. Through the reinforced transperisteel, he could see the orange blooms of kinetic strikes turning cities into craters, while streams of superheated plasma carved new valleys through mountain ranges that had stood for millions of years. "Sir." Communications Officer Rithol's voice had taken on the hollow quality of someone reporting the unthinkable. Ground control reports complete communications blackout from the southern continent. Seismic readings suggest total surface sterilization. Total surface sterilization. The words meant that everything on an entire continent, every person, every building, every tree, every microorganism had been reduced to component atoms by Dominion weapons. Zethmore had served in the Valtar military for 67 years, had fought in 3 wars and survived 2 attempted genocides. He thought he understood the meaning of loss. He had been wrong. Evacuation status? We've managed to get approximately 400,000 civilians off-world, reported Evacuation Coordinator Sithkal. But the Dominion is targeting our transport ships faster than we can launch them. Current projections. She paused, her ridge patterns darkening with grief. Current projections suggest we can save perhaps 2% of the remaining population. 2%. Out of nearly 5 billion Velatar, they might save 100 million. It was a number that should have been unthinkable. Yet here they were, discussing it like a logistics problem. Admiral, Rithal's tendrils flickered with urgent patterns. We're receiving a transmission. High encryption, diplomatic frequencies. Origin? Unknown. The encryption is unlike anything in our databases. But the translation matrix it's adapting somehow. Sir, I think this might be from the humans. Zethmore felt something stir in his chest. Not hope, not yet. But its distant cousin. On screen, the main display resolved into a face that was distinctly human. Pale skin marked with scars, blue eyes that seemed to hold depths of cold starlight, and an expression of absolute calm that somehow managed to be more terrifying than any threat. Admiral Zethmore. The human's voice carried through their translators with crystalline clarity. My name is Captain Daniel Cross, United Earthship Retribution. We received your distress signal. Captain Cross. Zethmore had to work to keep his voice steady. Lie. We thought no aid was coming. The other species, they've abandoned us. We're not other species, Cross interrupted, and something in his tone sent a chill through the command center. Admiral, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. In approximately 14 hours, you're going to see things on your long-range sensors that will seem impossible. Dominion ships disappearing. Energy readings that don't match any known weapons signatures. Debris patterns that suggest the use of prohibited weapons technology. Zethmore felt his ridge patterns shift to confusion. Captain, I don't understand. Are you I'm saying that in 14 hours the Dominion fleet currently exterminating your people is going to learn something about human military doctrine that we generally prefer to keep quiet. Cross's expression never changed, but something in his eyes burned with cold fire. We have a saying in our military, no one fights alone. The Dominion seems to have forgotten that. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Zethmore stared at the blank screen, his mind trying to process what he had just heard. 3 human ships. He had detected 3 contacts at most, against a Dominion battle group consisting of 47 vessels, including 3 dreadnoughts and a command battleship. It was suicide. Noble, perhaps, but suicide nonetheless. Admiral, Weapons Officer Telshura's voice carried a strange note. I'm reading massive energy buildups from the human contacts. Whatever they're doing, it's drawing power levels that should be impossible for ships that size. Explain? Sir, our computers estimate their maximum energy output at roughly the same level as our planetary defense platforms. Each ship is generating enough power to supply a small moon. Before Zethmore could respond, proximity alarms began screaming throughout the command center. Every display showed the same thing. The Dominion fleet was moving, abandoning its bombardment pattern to assume a defensive formation around the system's edge. They know, Zethmore whispered. They know the humans are coming. And deep in his soul, beneath layers of exhaustion and despair and the terrible weight of watching his civilization die, Admiral Zethmore felt something he had thought was dead forever. He felt hope. Captain Cross stood in the Retribution's primary weapons bay, watching his crew make final preparations for what the tactical computers insisted on calling a terminal engagement. The bay itself was a cathedral of human military engineering, 3 decks of weapons systems that could sterilize planets, crack moons, or turn entire fleets into expanding clouds of superheated plasma, but it was the crew that made Cross proud. Chief Petty Officer Williams, a woman who could coax impossible performance out of any weapons system ever built, was personally calibrating the main particle cannon arrays. Her hands moved over control surfaces with the precision of a surgeon and the confidence of someone who had spent 30 years turning theoretical maximum firepower into practical reality. Lieutenant Commander Patel, the ship's tactical officer, stood before a holographic display that showed every Dominion ship in excruciating detail. His team had spent weeks analyzing enemy movement patterns, weapons signatures, and shield frequencies. When the shooting started, they would know exactly where to hurt the enemy most. And throughout the bay, 43 other crew members worked with the quiet intensity of people who understood exactly what they were about to attempt. No one spoke about the odds. No one mentioned the tactical projections that gave them less than a 12% chance of survival. They were here to do a job, and they would do it. "Captain?" Rodriguez's voice came through his comm system. "We're receiving final targeting data from the observer drones. All Dominion ships are accounted for, and we have full tactical layouts on their fleet composition." Acknowledged. Cross touched his comm unit. "All hands. This is the captain. In 6 hours, we're going to do something that military historians will either call the most brilliant tactical maneuver in human history or the most spectacular suicide mission ever attempted." He paused, looking around at the faces of his crew. "Either way, we're going to make sure that every species in this galaxy remembers what happens when you commit genocide while humans are watching." The weapons bay erupted in a cheer that could have been heard through the hull itself. Cross felt something warm and fierce settle in his chest. These people, his people, were about to attempt something that every tactical manual said was impossible, and they were looking forward to it. "Chief Williams," Cross said, moving to stand beside the weapons array. "Status on the special packages?" Williams looked up from her calibrations, her eyes bright with anticipation. "All 16 Hellfire torpedoes are loaded and ready, sir. Antimatter warheads armed, stealth systems active. Once they're in flight, the Dominion won't see them coming until it's too late." Hellfire torpedoes, weapons that existed in violation of 17 different galactic treaties on prohibited military technology. Each one carried enough antimatter to sterilize a small continent, wrapped in stealth fields that made them effectively invisible until the moment of detonation. The Dominion had spent centuries absorbing civilizations that fought by civilized rules. They were about to discover what happened when civilization ended. "Mr. Patel," Cross continued, "confirmation on targeting priorities?" "Yes, sir. Primary targets are the command battleship and the 3 dreadnoughts. Secondary targets include their sensor platforms and communications arrays. Once we've disrupted their command structure, we can begin systematic elimination of the remaining fleet elements." Cross nodded. It was a good plan, in theory. In practice, they would be outnumbered nearly 16 to 1, facing weapons systems that could reduce their ships to atomic particles in seconds. But the plan wasn't really about winning through superior firepower. It was about giving the Dominion something they hadn't experienced in centuries. "Fear, Captain," came a voice from the comm system. "Martinez at communications. We're receiving transmission from the UES Nemesis and Wrathful. Both ships report ready for final approach." Acknowledged. "Signal both ships. Operation Hellhound begins in T-5 hours, 37 minutes. May God have mercy on their souls, because we sure as hell won't." Cross remained in the weapons bay for another hour, moving among his crew and offering words of encouragement or technical advice as needed. But his mind was elsewhere, calculating angles of approach and weapons solutions and the 100,000 variables that would determine whether they lived or died in the next few hours. Finally, he made his way back to the bridge, where Rodriguez was coordinating with the other ships and Park was analyzing final intelligence updates. The main display showed their target, 47 Dominion vessels arranged in a defensive formation that should have been impregnable. Should have been. "Commander Rodriguez," Cross said as he settled into the captain's chair, "signal all ships. Begin final approach." And in the darkness between stars, 3 human warships began their descent into hell, carrying with them the fury of a species that had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to stop a monster was to become something worse. The Dominion was about to receive an education in human military philosophy. The first lesson would be simple. When you threaten someone under human protection, you don't just face the human military. You face human creativity. And that, Cross reflected as his ship's weapons systems hummed to life, was something the galaxy was definitely not prepared for. The attack began not with fanfare or declarations, but with silence. General Korvac was reviewing bombardment reports when his sensors simply stopped. Every display in the command cathedral flickered and went dark for exactly 2.7 seconds, long enough for something impossible to happen. When the sensors came back online, 12 Dominion ships had ceased to exist. Report. Korvac's voice cracked like a whip through the neural link, but the responses came back fragmented, confused, tinged with something he had never heard from Dominion forces before. Panic. General, the destroyer Death's Promise is gone. No debris, no energy signature, just gone. Sir, we've lost contact with the entire third battle group. Sensors show empty space where they should be. Fleet Coordinator Vistal's ship isn't responding. Last telemetry showed. The reports cut off as space itself seemed to twist. Reality bending like heated metal around three shapes that materialized from absolute nothingness. The human ships hung in the void like predators made manifest, sleek, angular designs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Covered in sensor-dampening materials that made them appear more like holes in space than actual vessels. And they were close. Impossibly, terrifyingly close. All weapons, fire at will. Korvac's command sparked through the neural link, and the Dominion fleet erupted in a storm of energy that should have reduced the human ships to their component atoms. Should have. Instead, the humans did something that no military analyst in the galaxy had ever theorized. They fought dirty. Captain Cross watched the Dominion fleet's opening barrage splash harmlessly against the Retribution's experimental shielding. Energy fields that didn't just deflect incoming fire but absorbed it, channeling the power into the ship's own weapon systems. Around him, the bridge crew worked with mechanical precision, their movements choreographed through months of training for exactly this moment. Target acquired, reported Lieutenant Commander Patel from the tactical station. Dominion command ship. Range 400,000 kilometers. Shields up, weapons active. Mr. Patel, Cross's voice carried absolute calm. You are cleared to demonstrate to these bastards why humans don't play by civilized rules. Fire. The Retribution's main particle cannon, a weapon that existed in violation of every treaty humanity had signed, lanced out across the void with the fury of a captive star. But this wasn't the clean, precise beam that most species used for ship-to-ship combat. This was something nastier, a concentrated stream of antimatter particles wrapped in a magnetic containment field that was designed to fail at exactly the right moment. The beam struck the Dominion's fist and seemed to splash harmlessly against its shields. For 0.3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the antimatter reached critical concentration within the shield matrix itself. General Korvac had exactly enough time to realize that human weapons technology was built around a philosophy his species had never encountered, the deliberate acceptance of mutual destruction as a valid tactical option before his command ship became a expanding sphere of plasma that briefly outshone the system's sun. Splash 1 command ship, Patel reported with professional satisfaction. Remaining targets are breaking formation. Mr. Martinez, Cross continued, his attention already shifting to the next target. Signal the Nemesis and Wrathful. Pattern Delta 7. Tell them it's time to show these things how humans hunt. What followed was not a battle in any sense that galactic military doctrine would recognize. It was an ambush, executed by a species that had learned the art of warfare in an environment where everything, the weather, predators, the very ground itself, was actively trying to kill them. The UES Nemesis materialized directly behind a Dominion dreadnought, its stealth systems dropping just long enough to deploy a spread of Hellfire torpedoes at point-blank range. The torpedoes, each one a miniature sun wrapped in a shell of exotic matter, burrowed through the enemy's shields like they weren't there and detonated simultaneously inside the ship's reactor core. The dreadnought didn't explode so much as it ceased, reality itself seeming to stutter as 23,000 tons of warship was converted to energy in less than a microsecond. Meanwhile, the Wrathful was demonstrating another uniquely human innovation, the use of gravity as a weapon. Her experimental gravitic projectors locked onto a cluster of Dominion cruisers and simply The enemy ships crumpled like paper flowers, their hulls imploding under gravitational forces that briefly exceeded those found near a black hole's event horizon. And through it all, the three human ships moved like ghosts, their advanced stealth systems allowing them to appear and disappear at will, striking from impossible angles and vanishing before the enemy could respond effectively. "Sir," Attel's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "Our Dominion fleet strength is down to 21 ships and falling. They're attempting to withdraw." Cross studied the tactical display, watching red icons flee toward the system's edge with the desperate speed of prey animals. But these weren't prey animals. They were genocidal monsters who had been systematically exterminating civilian populations for centuries, and Captain Daniel Cross was about to teach them what human justice looked like. "Signal all ships," he said quietly. "No prisoners, no survivors. They came here to commit genocide." His voice hardened to something that could have cut diamond. "Let's show them what that word really means." Admiral Zolotaru watched the impossible unfold on his sensors, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. In less than 20 minutes, the Dominion force that had been systematically exterminating his people had been reduced from 47 ships to fewer than 20, and those remaining ships were fleeing in panic, their formation completely shattered, their command structure destroyed. "How?" he whispered to the empty air of his command center. "How is this possible?" "Admiral," Communications Officer Ritilal's voice carried wonder and disbelief in equal measure. "We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. On screen." Captain Cross's face appeared on the display, but he looked different now. Older, somehow, with lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. Behind him, Zethmore could see the human bridge crew working with the efficient precision of people who had just accomplished the impossible. "Admiral Zethmer," Kors said, his voice carrying the weight of recent battle, "the immediate threat to your world has been eliminated. We're currently pursuing the remaining Dominion ships to ensure they don't regroup for another assault." "Captain?" Zethmore struggled to find words adequate to what he had witnessed. "Your ships, your weapons. How did you—" "Admiral, there's something about human military doctrine that we don't generally advertise," Kors interrupted, and now his expression carried something that might have been regret. "Most species develop their weapons technology around the concept of proportional response. You attack us, we attack you back with equivalent force. It's civilized. It's reasonable. It follows all the accepted rules of galactic warfare." Cross paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that held depths of controlled fury. "Humans don't believe in proportional response. We believe in disproportional response. You threaten one of our cities, we erase your entire military. You attack our allies, we hunt down every ship in your fleet. You commit genocide." His voice went very quiet, very calm, very deadly. "You commit genocide, and we show you what that word means when applied by a species that considers nuclear warfare an acceptable tactic for home defense." The transmission ended, leaving Zethmore staring at a blank screen while his mind tried to process the implications of what he had just heard. The humans hadn't just rescued his people. They had demonstrated a level of military capability that redefined what was possible in modern warfare. Admiral Telshara's voice cut through his reverie. "Long-range sensors are tracking the Dominion survivors. The human ships are, sir, they're not just pursuing them, they're hunting them." On the tactical display, Zethmore watched 3 human ships methodically track down the fleeing Dominion vessels. There was no mercy in their movements, no hesitation, no acceptance of surrender. Each contact was eliminated with clinical precision until the display showed empty space where a conquering fleet had been. "Sir," Rithal's tendrils flickered with urgent patterns. "We're receiving multiple transmissions from across the galaxy. News services, military commands, diplomatic corps. Everyone wants to know what happened here." Zethmore understood. In less than an hour, 3 human ships had accomplished what entire fleets had failed to do. They had stopped a Dominion conquest cold, eliminated an entire battle group, and sent a message that would echo across every civilized world. That message was simple: humanity was no longer the naive newcomer to galactic politics. They were something far more dangerous, a species with the technology to back up their principles and the will to use that technology without hesitation. Admiral, came another voice from the communications station. Captain Cross is requesting permission to establish orbital position around Nexer-Tool. Granted, Zethmore replied immediately. Tell him that the Veltar people will remember this day. And tell him we are forever in humanity's debt. But even as he spoke the words, Zethmore wondered if the galaxy truly understood what had just happened. The humans hadn't just won a battle, they had announced their presence as a military power that operated by rules no other species fully comprehended. And somewhere in the depths of space, other Dominion fleets would be receiving reports of what happened at Nexer-Tool. They would learn that their invincible battle groups could be destroyed. They would learn that some species fought with weapons and tactics that made conventional warfare obsolete. Most importantly, they would learn that humanity had chosen a side in the galaxy's ongoing struggle between civilization and conquest. The age of human neutrality was over. 3 months later, Captain Daniel Cross stood in his quarters aboard the Retribution, reading reports from across human space. The desk before him was covered with intelligence briefings, diplomatic communications, and military analyses, all focused on a single inescapable conclusion. Everything had changed. The Dominion had responded to the Nexer-Tool incident by launching simultaneous attacks on 12 human colonies. Those attacks had lasted exactly 47 minutes before human response fleets arrived and demonstrated why attacking Earth's children was considered a terminal error in judgment. The Galactic Alliance had formally requested human membership, offering technology exchanges and mutual defense treaties that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. The Confederacy of Worlds had opened diplomatic channels for the first time in decades, clearly recognizing that the balance of power had shifted. And throughout it all, humanity continued to build ships like the Retribution vessels, designed not for exploration or trade, but for the specific purpose of ensuring that genocide would never again be considered a viable military strategy. Sir? Commander Rodriguez entered his quarters, carrying a datapad that glowed with priority encryption. We're receiving orders from Fleet Command. Cross took the pad, scanning the contents with the same calm attention he brought to everything else. New mission parameters, new targets, new opportunities to demonstrate why humans fought differently than everyone else. It seems, he said after a moment, that several species have decided to test whether Nexer-Tool was a fluke. Rodriguez smiled, not the polite expression of a professional officer, but the fierce grin of someone who had found their true calling. Shall I alert the crew, sir? Do that, Commander, and send a message to Fleet Command. The Retribution is ready to provide additional education in human military doctrine. As Rodriguez left to carry out his orders, Cross returned to his reports, but his mind was elsewhere, thinking about a blue-green world where everything had tried to kill his species for millions of years, and how that world had shaped humanity into something the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The universe was vast and full of wonders. It contained species of incredible beauty and civilizations of magnificent achievement. It held mysteries that would take millennia to solve and discoveries that would reshape understanding itself. But it also contained those who believed that might made right, that the strong could prey upon the weak without consequence, that genocide was an acceptable tool of statecraft. And now, for the first time in galactic history, those predators had encountered something that predated them. Humanity's ancient promise that evil would not go unopposed, that those who chose to be monsters would meet monsters in return. The galaxy had asked for human aid. It had received human justice instead. And in the deep black between the stars, that justice was just getting started. From the Nexer-Tool incident. A study in applied human military doctrine by Alliance military historian Kathmos Valandra. The battle that saved Nexer-Tool lasted 23 minutes and 47 seconds. In that brief span, 3 human warships accomplished what military strategists had declared impossible: the complete destruction of a Dominion conquest fleet by a numerically inferior force. But the true significance of that day cannot be measured in ships destroyed or lives saved. It marked the moment when humanity revealed itself as something the galaxy had never encountered. A species that considered the protection of other civilizations to be not just a moral imperative but a military doctrine. In the years that followed, the human approach to warfare would reshape galactic politics. Species that had remained neutral in the face of genocide found themselves choosing sides. Aggressive civilizations discovered that expansion came with consequences they had never imagined. And throughout the galaxy, a new understanding emerged, that some things were worth fighting for and that some species were willing to fight for them. The humans had a saying that became famous in those days: "No one fights alone." It was more than a promise. It was a declaration of intent that echoed across every world where freedom was threatened by those who would destroy it. The age of unchallenged conquest was over. The age of human protection had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.